welcoming you to another episode of the Re-Federalist Report. We are now on our 52nd episode of the Re-Federalist Report, a show that's all about kind of getting back to the original intent of the Constitution. And as part of that, we are going through James Madison's notes from the 1787 Philadelphia Convention to try to get into the minds of the Founding Fathers. Joining me today is my good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V. Gibbs.
Thanks for having me, as always.
All right, when we last left off, the Founding Fathers were, kind of debating a few things. I think the last debate really came down to, if I recall correctly, they were still trying to figure out for how many years should members of Congress serve. Some of the original proposals on the table were 3, 5, and 7 years. Obviously, that didn't make it through to the end product, but
it was odd that they wanted odd numbered years. It just seems mathematically that even numbers work better.
It does. It also makes it a lot better for historians because I can count back in 4-year increments a lot easier than I do 3, 5, and 7 and stuff like that. It just makes it a lot easier to remember the dates, I think. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, with no further ado, let's start out on a new day. For those of you just joining us or a little bit foggy on what we do, James Madison took the most copious notes of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and we are reading from them, word by word. With no further ado, I will share my screen. And last we left off was June 21st, the summer solstice. You can see they've been at this almost a month now. We're going to jump forward to Friday, June 22nd. Got a few months to go, so we're going to go a little bit quicker pace today. All right, Friday, June 22nd, 1787, in convention, the clause to open the convention, they say we've, resolved to receive fixed stipends to be paid out of the national treasury is considered. We're talking about salaries for Congress. Any thoughts?
Not yet. We'll get to the language. Go ahead.
Do you recall from our earlier show whether the representatives under the Articles of Confederation were getting paid?
I don't recall. I believe it was all volunteer.
I thought so too, but if you get a chance to look that up while we're talking, that'd be something fun to know. All right, Mr. Ellsworth starts. He moves to substitute payment by the states out of their own treasuries, observing that the manners of different states were different in the style of living and in the profits accruing from the exercise of like talents. What would be deemed, therefore, a reasonable compensation in some states, and others would be very unpopular, and might impede the system of which it made a part. What's he saying, Doug?
And I was looking something up, so I did not pay as close of attention as I could. But if I believe what you're talking about here, who was talking?
That was Mr. Ellsworth.
Okay. Profit exercise down to pressure.
He's from Connecticut, and at the time, I think Connecticut's probably one of the small. It's definitely one of the smaller states.
Well, and based on what you just said, they were concerned about the larger states, controlling things. And let's see, what would deem therefore a reasonable compensation in some states, in others would be very unpopular. Okay, so every economy is different. And at this point, each state is like its own little country. And he's basically saying that, gosh, if you're going to pay, an amount, in one state, that might be enough to actually pay for a few things. Another state may not necessarily be so because of the differing economies. This is interesting because it's a statement that comes from this attitude that they're still trying to fix the articles. They're still going to be totally independent states, that there's not going to be as tight of a union as we are going to see through the Constitution. This is not to say that the states lose their sovereignty. This is to say that the union is going to be a more fulfilled, more complete union. And ultimately, the economies will be a national economy rather than each state economies. But at this point, Ellsworth is still looking at it from every state has its own economy kind of attitude.
Yeah. Really, the question is, Oh, we'll get to it next. William, with Mr.
And bigger
Williams.
states are making more money.
Yeah, and that's why it's always going to be.
Mhm.
You know, we are a union with a lot of common interests, but not totally common economies. That's why a national government doesn't make sense.
Right.
So next to speak is Mr. Williamson. He's from North Carolina. He favored the idea of it. We're talking about, you know, having the stipends. I hear that pronounced both directions, so I'm going to just
Yeah.
keep
So
going.
now I want to add something real quick before you go on, because Ellsworth also is, and I'm glad you asked the question for me to look something up, because Ellsworth's statement probably draws from this as well. So your question earlier was, and I didn't really, as a constitutionalist, the Articles of Confederation is important to me, but I don't get into its details as much as I do the Constitution, just because that's kind of my my area of study. But here's the answer. Yes, members of Congress under the Articles of Confederation were paid, but not by the federal government. Instead, individual state legislatures were responsible for compensating their own delegates. This system often led to inconsistent pay, as some states paid more promptly or generously than others. So he's drawing from that.
Very excellent. I'm glad you looked that up. And that's exactly what they're saying is we're trying to move to make it paid out of the national treasury. Williamson's from North Carolina. He likes the idea of paying it out of the national treasury. He reminded the House of the prospect of new states to the westward. They would be poor, would pay little into the common treasury, and would have a different interest from the old states. He did not think, therefore, that the latter ought to pay the expenses of men who would be employed in thwarting their measures and interests. That's interesting.
In other words, he's
Okay,
first of all, that's kind of a nudge and a stab at this idea of political politicians, or professional politicians, should I say? But also, I'm fascinated by something. As we go westward, new states, they would be poor. There is an assumption that A, you have no port city. B, you're going to be it's going to be agriculture only. And so at first, perhaps that may be true with these new states, but Mr. Williamson, it is a what's the right word? It is a lack of positivity when it comes to westward expansion on how it's going to work out, I guess. I guess he's looking at things just staying in agricultural.
Yeah, let me in lieu of that sentence, and he's favoring what Ellsworth said. Ellsworth was saying, "I'd rather pay it by the states out of their own treasuries," and he's saying if we have an equal pay from Congress, that everyone gets the same whatever basic minimum wage.
Williamson's saying, well, and how are they going to pull it off?
No, he actually agrees that it should be paid state by state.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what these guys are arguing against, making out of the national treasury, I think. Mr. Gorham, we haven't heard from Gorham before, have we?
I don't think so.
Let me look real quick. Gorham is from. Do I have that on here? He's got to be on my list. We got someone speaking that doesn't exist.
Well, perhaps.
Oh, here he is. He's from Massachusetts. Nathaniel Gorham.
Yeah, he was probably there for a handful of weeks, and then it's like walked away. Maybe, I don't know.
He wished not to refer the matter to the state legislature, who were always paring down salaries. Wouldn't that be nice? In such a manner as to keep out of offices men most capable of executing the functions of them. So he's saying the state legislatures are too much of penny pinchers, and good men don't serve. And just the opposite's what occurred.
Well, and that's funny because the attitude is they're serving their country, but if you want a good person, you got to pay them. And it's almost a paradox, and it kind of reminds me of the current attitude towards city managers. And some of these city managers get paid these ungodly amounts, and the city council say, "Well, yeah, but if you want a good one, you got to pay lots of money." It's not always necessarily true, but it tends to be true, unfortunately. But anyway, go ahead.
He thought also that it would be wrong to fix the compensations by the Constitution.
And correction, Gorham did not leave. He's one of the signers. He was there for the entire convention. So
it's not a name we run into often.
Not a man of many words.
because we could not venture to make it as liberal as it ought to be without exciting an enmity against the whole plan. Let the national legislature provide for their own wages from time to time, as the state legislatures do. He had not seen this part of their power abused, nor did he apprehend the abuse of it.
It almost sounds like he fears that the states will sabotage the whole situation.
Yeah, and he's worried about local corruption. He says the national legislature would never give themselves absurd salaries.
Yeah.
Of course not. They wouldn't do that, would they, Doug?
No, never.
Our good friend Randolph comes in. He feared we were going too far in consulting popular prejudices. Whatever respect might be due to them in lesser matters or in cases where they formed the permanent character of the people, he thought it neither incumbent on nor honorable for the convention to sacrifice right and justice to that consideration. All right.
Is he saying they're overthinking it?
I think that's what he's saying. If the states were to pay the members of the national legislature, a dependence would be created that would vitiate the whole system. Vitiate means kind of make it so it never happened. The whole nation has an interest in the attendance and services of the members of the national treasury, therefore, is the proper fund for supporting them.
Now, and once again, this is a thinking that's getting away from being a confederation and more of a more perfect union, a more complete union.
Mr. King, again, Massachusetts, he urged the danger of creating a dependence on the states by leaving to them the payment of the members of the national legislature. He supposed it would be best to be explicit as to the compensation to be allowed. A reserve on that point, or a reference to the national legislature of the quorum, would excite greater opposition than any sum that would be actually necessary or proper.
He said quorum, meant quantum. Would excite greater opposition than any sum that would actually necessarily be, it seems to me what he's saying is it sounds like also he's wanting it to be paid from the federal government, because if you're doing it state by state, they're going to complain. We can't pay that amount, and it's going to, you're going to get greater opposition. I guess getting back to that idea that the states are cheap.
So what they're really debating here are two things. First of all, where should the money come from? Because obviously whoever signs your paycheck, you've got more loyalty to them. And the other question is who decides how much you get paid. So both things are on the table.
Now, ultimately, where does the money come from? It kind of became a hybrid of the states and the federal government, but it was paid through the federal treasury. And when I say hybrid, what I mean by that is the federal government had its own ways of creating revenue, like tariffs. And then the other revenue came from the states, based on their population. And so the states did pony up, just indirectly.
Mr. Sherman contended for referring both the quantum and the payment to the state legislatures. Wilson was against fixing the compensation, as circumstances would change and call for a change of the amount. He thought it of great moment that the members of the national government should be left as independent as possible of the state governments in all respects. So exact opposite arguments here.
Well, and Wilson's is interesting that circumstances will change, so will the amounts. And the way he says it, it's almost like he's assuming it could go back down. Have you ever seen something go up in a central system and then go back down? Ever? So.
All right. I was going to give an example, but I don't want to get into it.
Of something going back down?
Yeah, I don't want to get into the whole deflationary spiral talk.
Okay.
All right. That's a very different show. Mr. Madison concurred in the necessity of preserving the compensations for the national government independent of the state governments, but at the same time approving to fixing them by the Constitution, saying we're going to give you a fixed price. I'm guessing they're going to talk about putting a mechanism to eventually raise them, but we'll see if they get to that. Which might be done by taking a standard which would not vary with circumstances. He disliked particularly the policy suggested by Mr. Williamson of leaving the members from the poor states beyond the mountains to the precarious and parsimonious support of their constituents. Meaning if the states have to pay, their Congress critters are going to be living in huts. The western states hereafter arising should be admitted into the Union. They ought to be considered as equals and as brethren.
That's a very Madisonian thing to say.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that, at the time we've got 13 states, but they do have colonies that are, they do have territories that are eventually going to, and they're already planning on expanding westward.
Yeah, well, and the mountains being the Appalachians, and, well, remember the Northwest Territory has already been designated as being for future states. If you remember, during the Articles of Confederation debates on even ratifying the thing, states like Maryland and Connecticut and Delaware were holding out, and New Jersey were holding out signing the Articles of Confederation because the larger states had all this territory west of the mountains one of them quipped that Virginia would go from ocean to ocean if left to its own devices. And so that territory was given to the government to be reorganized as states later. So they're already looking at that area. Plus, they know, south of that, you've got, Kentucky and what became Kentucky and Tennessee and all of that. But also at that time, they are very disconnected from the rest of the country because they are beyond the mountains. They kind of got to fend for themselves. They don't have any industry, and agriculture is pretty local at this point. And so they are, for lack of a better way of saying it, poor areas. And this is their mindset. This is what they're looking at as they discuss this.
Yeah, there's no railroad yet connecting anything, even the waterway, to the Great Lakes channels and stuff like that.
Yeah, we don't have the Erie Canal. We don't have, we don't have the railroads exactly. We don't even have the Cumberland Road yet.
And we don't have control of the Mississippi yet, do we?
No, not yet.
If their representatives were to be associated with the common councils, it was of common concern that such provisions should be made as would invite the most capable and respectable characters into service. Once again, pay to play. Next to speak is Mr. Hamilton. Hang on, I got it here. The Darth Vader theme.
Just for Hamilton. You've been thinking about that ever since we said that.
I told you I had that ready this week.
Yeah. All right, Alexander Hamilton. Dude, by the way, my wife just started the book Hamilton's Curse.
Oh, excellent. She's going to love it.
Yeah, she finished my history book. For those of you who are watching, Repeal Democracy, the 7 Worst Constitutional Liars, and then I wrote a history book from the Saxons to Jefferson. I'm still working on part 2, which is the 1800s. So I said, okay, now you're ready for this one, and I handed her Hamilton's Curse.
It's one of the better. It's one of the better. I'd say it's one of the top 10 books I would have anybody read if they want to understand American history.
Oh, absolutely. But anyway, continue.
That's by Thomas DiLorenzo, people.
Yeah.
Hamilton, what's he going to screw up this time? He apprehended inconveniency from fixing the wages.
Now, let's stop right there. See, here's what I hate about Hamilton. He's right, but then there's something devious behind it. And he is right. There is an inconveniency because you fix the wages, economics change, inflation, whatever. You want to cost of living, you want to get into all of that. And so he's exactly right. The problem is, like most good big government-minded people, he takes the truth and then uses it for his nefarious ideas.
And you're going to see what those are in the next sentence. He was strenuous against making the National Council dependent on the legislative rewards of the states. He wants it national.
Yeah, but and notice the language, rewards of the states. He's not talking stipend. He's not talking compensation or salary. They're rewards. Anyway, go ahead.
Those who pay are the masters of those who are paid. He doesn't want Congress to be subservient to the states that actually elected him.
Right. Remember this guy. Remember, folks, as you've been listening to this is a man who wants the states to be just mere provinces. So while he's technically right, sort of, his motivation is we need to make the states as little involved as possible, and that's where the problem lies. Anyway, go ahead.
And we really are living in Hamilton's America right now.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, our politicians in D.C., they don't represent their local constituents. They answer to 1.5 national political parties. And those political parties' agendas are set by the people the donor class. And that's not what these guys, that's what Hamilton wanted. That's not what the rest of the founders were talking about.
I would agree with you on the 1.5 until the last year or so. I'd say maybe now it's more of a 1.35.
Oh, okay. If I can't get that Save America Act passed, it's going to go down to like 1.25. Payment by the states would be unequal, as the distant states would have to pay for the same term of attendance and more days in traveling to and from the seat of government.
Okay, so this is something I was thinking earlier. Expenses are going to be different depending on where they're coming from. Even today, expenses of travel and all of that.
Well, sure. The capital right now is in Philadelphia. So if you're the Philadelphia congressperson, you get to live at home.
But if you're from Georgia, it's a heck of a ride. And Andrew Jackson, when he became a Congress critter, he rode his horse, through the mountains to get there. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, we just saw in the news this week that a couple of the airports are telling Congress and the House and the Senate, they no longer get special privileges going through.
It's actually one of the airlines. I want to say it's Delta.
Yeah, I think it was Delta.
Yeah. So I was just grinning from ear to ear when I heard that news. Says, you're not kings, you're not royalty, you're not nobility, and if the times call for it, you're just gonna have to hang with everybody else. But anyway, all right, go ahead.
He expatiated emphatically on the difference between the feelings and views of the people and the governments of the states.
Emphatically. He expatiated emphatically. Was he up on his desk pounding his foot? I wonder. Go ahead.
Okay. He expatiated emphatically on the difference between the feelings and views of the people and the governments of the states arising from the personal interest and official inducements, which must render the latter unfriendly to the general government.
Again, the states could be a problem here. We can't give them any way to be a problem because the states could destroy this whole thing. The states are destructive and dangerous. That's what he's basically saying.
I love you, Hamilton. Mr. Wilton moved that the salaries of the first branch be ascertained by the national legislature and be paid out of the national treasury. Madison thought the members of the legislature too much interested to ascertain their own compensation. It would be indecent.
I'm sorry, Madison. I so love him. And that's it's Captain Obvious stating the obvious, but it's well said. Guys, you're spending all this time thinking about what's going to go into your pocket. Really?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
He considered that indecent.
Yes.
So this is put to the vote. And the vote is whether it should be to the national government. So we got a no from Massachusetts, a no from Connecticut. New York is divided. New Jersey's a yes. Pennsylvania is a yes. A no from Delaware, a no from Maryland, no from Virginia, no from North Carolina, no from South Carolina, and Georgia's divided. The no's won this one.
It doesn't mean that's the way it's going to stay.
Well, it didn't, did it? The national government did end up. Mm-hmm. All right. So now the question is for striking out national treasury. So it's kind of confusing the way they do these votes, but let's see how that.
Well, remember, we're still trying to, they're at a point in this convention where they're still figuring things out. And this is something I've reminded the listeners on Tuesdays with Ron's show at the Untold History Channel a number of times. Remember, as they're going, they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know if it's going to be successful. All they know is what they know. So remember, we're looking back at this through hindsight and modern standards in our head. So understand, these are guys that live in a time very different than ours, and they have no clue. They are trying to do what they think is best. They've got a lot of different opinions. It's almost like putting 10 rabbis into a room together and you get 20 different opinions. This is what we're dealing with. And you've got Hamilton, who is dead set against making sure that sovereignty stays in place. And Madison saying, whoa, wait a second. Not only is sovereignty important in order to make sure we don't have too much power going in one direction, we need to allow the state, even the poor ones, be treated kind of on equal footing. And when he said that, that was kind of interesting because remember, he's the one that wrote the Virginia plan. He's already starting to change his mind about the big state control with that statement. Madison is growing in his move towards limited government and what would be a federalism, and Hamilton's growing in his manners of how he wants to stand against it and his nefarious ways of doing it. So, but remember, these guys are not sure. So this vote shot down. It does ultimately become out of the national treasury. They do get back to this later and vote differently, but it's a lot of discussions. It's a lot of, okay, this light bulb turned on, this light bulb turned on. Number one, this won't work. Number two, the states would never accept this. And I think the latter is the primary reason why it goes back to national treasury. Remember, also, there's always that elephant in the room. Will the states ratify this idea? Go ahead.
All right, last couple arguments on this. Hamilton renewed his opposition. He pressed the distinction between state governments and their people. The former would be the rivals of the general government. The state legislatures ought not, therefore, to be the paymasters of the latter.
And while he's right for the wrong reasons. He fears the states being dangerous to the Union.
Ellsworth says something interesting. He says, if we're jealous of the state governments, they will be so of us. If on going home, I tell them we gave the general government such powers because we could not trust you, will they adopt it? And within a year approbation, it is a nullity.
It's back to the will the states ratify us?
I had a really divided vote on this one. I had I think we got 1, 2, 3, 4 ayes, 5 noes, and 2 states divided.
Well, see, the right call is the national legislature, and they know this. But at the same time, they know that the states may, depending on which state it is, not like it one way or the other. The richer states probably would rather they just pay because they could get the best people, whatever. The not so large states probably would prefer to come out of the national treasury because they just don't have the revenue for it. So you got a situation where you're going to see a division in the states, a division in attitudes. But ultimately, once again, we're going to return to this. There's going to be more discussion. All right, go ahead.
All right, here's Hamilton writing. Madison writing, nobody talking. It says, on a question for substituting adequate compensation in place of fixed stipends, it was agreed upon nem con. Okay, so real quick, nem con we run into quite a bit. I had to look it up what it meant. I just had never run into it for some reason. What it means is it's Latin for nemine contradicente, and it means basically with no one contradicting. No one spoke against.
Okay.
So that's what that means when we run into it. I had to finally look it up. So they're basically swapping out the language. They're trying to get adequate compensation in place of fixed stipends. The friends of the latter being willing that the practicability of fixing the compensation should be considered hereafter in forming the details. It was then moved by Mr. Butler that a question be taken on both points jointly, to wit, adequate compensation to be paid out of the national treasury. Now, what's the final language we get to, Doug?
Compensation. And that word compensation is interesting because it is a salary, but it's a salary that's compensating, not a stipend or something that's due as a salary. Compensation is more you're given your time. We want to make sure you're reimbursed for that time. It's kind of that attitude. And so that's why it's interesting. They also use the word, let's see, what was it just above that? What is, go up a little bit on the page a little bit. Adequate compensation. There was something else. I don't know where it's at now, but basically the attitude was make sure it's enough and make sure it's adequate. We're not wanting these people to be rich, but we need to make sure they're not losing money. It's kind of the attitude.
Well, Butler wants to put things into one sentence, the two issues being objected to. I'm sorry, being proposed, and it gets objected to as out of order because there's parts having been separately decided upon. So no, you can't combine them together yet. The president referred the question to the order of the House, and it was determined to be in order.
Who's the president, folks? Do you remember? George Washington, president of the convention. In that chair with the sun setting or rising on the back of it, if ever you've seen that.
And rarely to be heard from. I'll skip over the votes. The question on the sentence was then postponed by South Carolina in the right of the state. Okay. Colonel Mason steps in. Different topic. He moved to insert 25 years of age as a qualification of the members of the first branch. He thought it absurd that a man today should not be permitted by the law to make a bargain for himself, and tomorrow should be authorized to manage the affairs of a great nation. It's like the old argument, if you're old enough to fight in a war, you're old enough to vote.
Mm-hmm.
It was the more extraordinary as every man carried with him, in his own experience, a scale for measuring the deficiency of young politicians. Since he would, if interrogated, be obliged to declare that his political opinions at the age of 21 were too crude and erroneous to merit an influence on public measures. Now, what's interesting about that is there's some pretty young guys here.
Yeah, what's also interesting, and I've said this in my classes before, it fascinates me that in a culture that believes by 12 or 14, depending on who you're talking to, you're a man. At 10 years old, John Quincy Adams was the secretary for the minister to Russia. So young men were educated. The average age going into Yale and Harvard was 13. So young men were educated. They were expected to provide, to work, and so on and so forth. But you didn't have enough political sense to vote until you're 21, enough political sense to hold office till you're 25. And yet we stupidly decided to reduce the voting age to 18 during the 60s, when young men are not as far along as they were back then. So I just found it fascinating that in a culture where young men are men, they're fighting in the war at, if you're old enough pretty much to carry the rifle. While most of them were 16, 17, 18 minimum, there were 15-year-olds in the war every once in a while during the Revolutionary War. So, but yet, when it comes to the science of politics, even at 21, says Colonel Mason of himself, he wasn't quite there yet. So let's make it 25 just to hold office. And I just have always found that fascinating that they recognize that while you may be able to do a lot of things when you're younger, political science ain't one of them until you get older.
And the law in many states at the time, said you had to be a certain age to enter in a legally binding contract.
Mm-hmm.
And, that made sense.
Right.
It goes on. He goes, it had been said that Congress had proved a good school for our young men. It might be so for anything he knew, but if it were, he chose that they should bear the expense of their own education. And let the young learn on their own. They're not ready to lead.
I love the way they spoke back then.
Mr. Wilson was against abridging the rights of election in any shape. It was the same thing whether this were done by disqualifying the objects of choice or the persons choosing. The motion tended to damp the efforts of genius and of laudable ambition. There was no more reason for incapacitating youth than age, where the requisite qualifications were found. He's allowing for some people are precarious when they're younger. Many instances might be mentioned of signal services rendered in high stations to the public before the age of 25. The present Mr. Pitt and Lord Bolingbroke were striking instances. So now they're voting on the question for inserting 25 years of age. We've got a no, an aye, a divided, an aye, a no, an aye. 25 years of age is going to be carried forward.
Mr. Wilson's the beginning of what he had to say kind of reminded me of a lot of today's political those seeking the something that's not quite constitutional, the opposition of the Constitution, because they say, well, because it's a right to vote, there should be no obstacles whatsoever, be it age or anything, no obstacles whatsoever. Now, if you go to Bushrod, Washington, Supreme Court Justice and nephew of George Washington, he in one particular case argued that voting isn't a right, it's a privilege. It carries all the all of the characteristics of a privilege, and you don't just, and when it comes to rights, even certain rights have to have certain obstacles to achieve it. You don't just give them because it's a right. And so I find Wilson reminding me too much of some of today's politicians in the way he spoke. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, we get back to Mr. Gorham. He's referring to the resolution they're debating still. He wants to strike out the last member of the third resolution concerning the ineligibility of members of the first branch to offices during the term of their membership and for 1 year after. That's referring to once you leave your office, you've got to stay out of government for a year. He considered it as unnecessary and injurious. It was true abuses had been displayed in Great Britain, but no one could say how far they might have contributed to preserve the due influence of the government, nor what might have ensued in case the contrary theory had been tried.
And holding your office consistently, depending on what the office is, sometimes necessary. Especially when you're dealing with what we deal with today, and what Jefferson wound up dealing with, something that we call the deep state. You want someone who has experience, a consistently on the political battlefield, so to speak. Then again, sometimes taking that break is also can be good, depending on what the level of government is. For example, the city of Murrieta, when I lived there in Southern California, actually put term limits on their city council members, but not total term limits. You could not hold office more than twice in a row. So if you got elected and reelected, then you had to step down and take a 2-year break before you could run again. And that at the local level worked out nicely. But at a national level, I don't know if it would work so well. And this is kind of what they're talking about, is that, if you're in government, because you wind up in this bubble, that's all you know. And the rest of the world, sometimes then loses touch with you and you lose touch with them. Might be said that President Trump, after getting that break between his presidencies, it was for the benefit that he stepped away because he was able to see things more clearly and go back in with better perspective. But to use the Constitution to force someone to take that break, that's the question.
Mr. Butler opposes Mr. Gorham's statement. He says this precaution against intrigue was necessary. He appealed to the example of Great Britain, where men got into Parliament that they might get offices for themselves and for their friends. This was the source of the corruption that ruined their government. He's talking about cronyism.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. King thought we were refining too much. Such a restriction on the members would discourage merit. It would also give a pretext to the executive for bad appointments, as he might always plead this as a bar to the choice he wished to have made. So now what he's talking about is the corruption in terms of executive appointments, because they have to be approved by the Senate. And he's trying to make sure this can't be used as leverage. Some of these arguments come up these days when we talk about term limits. I think we'll probably want to talk about that a bit later. But there's one other point I had, and I just forgot what that was.
I will say this. If you want evidence on whether or not term limits works out for legislatures, just look at California. When they went to term limits, it got, from a constitutional conservative point of view, much worse.
Mr. Wilson was against fettering elections and discouraging merit. He suggested also the fatal consequence in a time of war of rendering perhaps the best commanders ineligible. Talking about, I guess, serving in the government, and then in Congress, I guess, is really part of the situation here. Appearing to our situation during the late war and directly leading to a recollection of the appointment of the commander-in-chief out of Congress. Colonel Mason was for shutting the door against all events against corruption. He enlarged on the venality and abuses in this particular in Great Britain, and alluded to the multiplicity of foreign embassies by Congress. The disqualification he regarded as a cornerstone in the fabric.
One of the things that these guys knew from their own history is that legislatures are important. Legislatures are where the government's power begins, the ability to make law. However, all government operations must not necessarily be in the hands of the legislature. And one of the ways they learned that was during the American Revolution. George Washington could not make a move without getting permission from Congress first. This is kind of the commander-in-chief point of view. Ultimately, Congress was losing the war because they kept tying George Washington's hands. Eventually, they learned they needed to get out of the affairs of the commander-in-chief and let him do what he needed to do. And this is, I think, in their minds, this is a part of what's driving this conversation here. As a friend of mine likes to say, for God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee. Sometimes Congress gets in its own way, and it gets in the way of the government. And I think that's a part of what's kind of behind this, but it's also a fear that if you give Congress too much power and you give them too much ability, they will not only become corrupted, and they will never leave, get offices for the friends, but use their power then to control everything. So I think so you've got kind of a twofold kind of discussion here. The corruptibility of Congress and giving Congress too much power. And that's kind of the argument that's going on here.
And part of this conversation is what we call the spoils system, and to the victor go the spoils. And it's been kind of an American tradition that whoever wins an election, their friends and their donors are going to get the cushy appointments. And that has been problematic throughout our history.
Yes.
I mean, that was a big in Lincoln's time. And
elections have consequences.
And it's also why moneyed interests support politicians, because they know who people writing the bills,
right?
Who's going to appoint the people that they're ahead of these departments. Those are the people handing out the contracts, and that's what led to the robber barons. And that's what internally. That's why we say federally funded internal improvements was the first step towards crony capitalism and mercantilism. Hamilton's all about that. There were inconveniences on both sides. We must take man as we find him, and if we expect him to serve the public, must interest his passions in doing so. He says that reliance on pure patriotism had been the source of many of our errors. He thought the remark of Mr. Gorham a just one. He's arguing for crony capitalism. It was impossible to say what would be the effect in Great Britain of such a reform as had been urged. You can't know something, you can't prove a negative. It was known that one of the ablest politicians, a Mr. Hume, had pronounced all that influence on the side of the crown, which went under the name of corruption, an essential part of the weight which maintained the equilibrium of the Constitution. Hamilton doesn't change his spots much, does he?
No.
So interesting vote on striking out ineligibility. You have four aye votes.
Let me say this. It's almost like he's saying people who that are in prison mostly don't like broccoli. So that means that people who don't like broccoli go in prison. Prove me wrong. You can't prove me wrong. That's what he's doing. He's saying something that's kind of ridiculous. So prove me wrong. You can't. So it must be so.
Well, they take a vote on the word ineligibility, and you get 4 yeses, 4 noes, and 3 divided states. So I guess it does not carry. The notes don't indicate one way or the other. So we're going to move on to June 23rd. It is a Saturday. These politicians today, can't even get a bill passed, and they're going home for Easter. All right, the question. Yesterday postponed by South Carolina for agreeing to the whole sentence for allowing an adequate compensation to be paid out of the United States. It's going straight to vote. And he says, so the question was lost and the sentence was not inserted.
So we're still not able to get the compensations paid by the National Treasury in there yet. Oh, and here's Pinckney.
General Pinckney again. He moves to strike out the ineligibility of members of the first branch to offices established by a particular state. Didn't like the language by a particular state. He argued the inconveniency to which such a restriction would expose both the members of the first branch and the states wishing for their services from the smallness of the object to be attained by this restriction. So you're saying the penalty is worse than what you're trying to avoid.
Yeah, to me, it was a bit of a word salad. But anyway, go ahead.
He says it would seem from the idea, some of these are word salads, but we got to fight through them. It would seem from the ideas of some that we are erecting a kingdom to be divided against itself. He disapproved such a fetter on the legislature. Mr. Sherman seconds the motion, which to strike out the ineligibility.
Yeah, remember, Pinckney is a Hamiltonian-minded guy from a very Jeffersonian-minded state. So he is kind of an interesting deal. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Says it seemed we were erecting a kingdom at war with itself. The legislature ought not to be fettered in such a case on the question.
Once again, the fears are that the states with their own petty jealousies may interfere.
In this motion, which is to strike out ineligibility, the ayes take it. So the ineligibility is getting out of the right now out of the resolution. And that was a pretty strong aye vote. The only nays were Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and Delaware. Madison renewed his motion yesterday, made and waived to render the members of the first branch ineligible during their term of service and for 1 year after to such offices only as should be established or the emoluments thereof augmented by the legislature of the United States during the time of them being members. If you vote on a position and how much it gets paid, you're not eligible for it for a short period of time. So you can't create like the the borders are, and then have that person step into position. Or I guess a better way of putting it is, you create the Department of if you're in Congress and you vote to create the Department of Homeland Security and set the salary of it, you can't have that position.
And what they're discussing right now does wind up in the Constitution in Article 1, Section 6. No senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States which shall have been created, or the emoluments where shall have been increased during such time. So in other words, if you are there to vote for a raise for a position, you can't have that position. If you were there to create a particular position, you can't have it if you voted on it. And this was an attempt to guard against corruption and I'll give you this if you give me that kind of thing. So that's what they're talking about.
He supposed that the unnecessary, it's amazing they spent this much time on what should be such a simple.
Yeah.
He supposed that the unnecessary creation of offices and increases of salaries were the evil's most experiences, and that if the door was shut against them, it might properly be left open for the appointment of members to other offices as an encouragement to the legislative service. Is that what he's saying? Is that corruption is going to happen no matter what?
No, what he's saying is while there's a chance of corruption, that doesn't mean that you should disallow them from holding any seat, just the one that was affected.
Mr. Alex Martin seconded the motion. Mr. Butler says the amendment does not go far enough and would be easily evaded. This is Congress. They'll find loopholes.
Oh, who would evade such a thing? Like someone that was a senator in New York to vote for a raise for the Secretary of State and then become Secretary of State. That would never happen. Sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. Rutledge.
I thought I was naming names. Hillary. All right, go ahead.
Not the only one that's had some fun with the Secretary of State. I mean, we go to John Lansing back in the it was Lansing back in the 1880s and 90s. The motion of my colleague, this is Mason again. I'm sorry, did we skip Rutledge? Yeah.
Yes, you did.
He was for preserving the legislatures as pure as possible by shutting the door against appointments of its own members to offices, which was one source of its corruption. Okay,
so this gets back to what Madison was saying. Madison was saying, so what the proposal is if you're voting on this stuff, you can't hold any of those. And Madison's saying, no, if someone voted for a raise for this office, they shouldn't be able to run for it. That doesn't mean not all the other offices should be shut off to them. And so Rutledge is now adding to that. He's saying, well, should we shut off appointments of any person who's been in Congress for any of those positions ever? Because once again, they're worried about corruption. Or should it only be the ones that someone voted for to create or give raises to, so they cannot be appointed to that, but they can be appointed to other things? So that's the question here. That's what's on the table right now.
And of course, George Mason is going to be one of the more, shall we say, sober minds in the room.
Mm-hmm.
The motion of my colleague is but a partial remedy for the evil. He appealed to him as a witness of the shameful partiality of the legislature of Virginia shown to its own members. We've already seen cronyism. He enlarged on the abuses and corruption of the British Parliament connected with the appointments of its members. He could not suppose that a sufficient number of citizens could not be found who would be ready, without the inducement of eligibility to offices, to undertake the legislative service.
Now, what he's saying here is, let me say this properly. You arrogant bastards, you think that only people from your little group can fit those positions. You don't think we can find people that would be good enough for those positions? You bunch of elitists.
Exactly what it's
basically. Yeah. I tell people the more and more I get to know the anti-federalists and people like George Mason, the more and more I appreciate them as time moves on. But anyway, go ahead.
He follows it up and said, genius and virtue, it may be said, ought to be encouraged. Genius, for aught he knew, might, but that virtue should be encouraged by such a species of venality was an idea that at least had the merit of being new. That's interesting. If I'm reading this correctly, this is a bit of a sarcastic dig that if you use venality to encourage virtue, you're probably not going to get it. This is a brand new idea.
Well, the thing is, too, is the way he worded that. It was so Franklin-esque. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, you
notice Ben Franklin hasn't said much. But I'm sure he appreciated that one.
Going back to Mr. Rufus King, he remarked that we were refining too much in this business. I agree with that. And that the idea of preventing intrigue and solicitation offices were chimerical. You say that no member shall himself be eligible to any office. Will this restrain him from availing himself of the same means which would gain appointments for himself, to gain them for his son, his brother, or any other object of partiality? We were losing, therefore, the advantages on one side without avoiding the evils of the other.
In other words, just saying, so you're not going to let him in there, but yeah, he'll find his guy. This kind of reminds me of why term limits don't work, because see, there's a certain mindset in government, a certain group that is very collectivistic in their thinking. So it doesn't matter if you keep one person in there, their son, their cousin, their colleague is going to be exactly the same, because they're, for lack of a better way of putting it, like the Borg. It's just a one mind thing. This is the type of thing that they're trying to guard against. There is a certain type of ideology out there from their point of view as well, that it's all one. It's a groupthink kind of way of going, and so you're not going to stop it no matter what. That's what he's saying. So you keep him out, next man is going to step in. It's going to be the same junk.
Yeah, corrupt people are going to find a way.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Wilson supported the motion. He said the proper cure, he said, for corruption in the legislature was to take from it the power of appointing to offices. One branch of corruption would indeed remain, that of creating the unnecessary offices or granting unnecessary salaries, and for that the amendment would be a proper remedy.
So in other words, don't let Congress do the appointing, let the executive do the appointing. But and this goes back to Madison earlier, don't let somebody be appointed to an office that they had some say in creating or giving money to, but they should still be eligible for other offices. This is kind of what we have going on here. Should someone who has served be eligible for an office in the executive branch, which they hadn't really considered executive branch yet, but ultimately that's what it would become. And B, should Congress make the appointments, or should the president make the appointments? Ultimately, we get a hybrid, but we'll get to that.
And I like the fact that he refers to unnecessary offices being created.
Yeah, which is probably 9/10 of the departments.
So that,
unnecessary and unconstitutional.
In other words, they understood bureaucracy already.
Well, there was such thing as a deep state, and it was called Britain.
He animadverted, it's a tough word for me, on the impropriety of stigmatizing with the name of venality the laudable ambition of rising into the honorable offices of government. Just because you want an office doesn't mean you're venal. An ambition most likely to be felt in the early and most incorrupt period of life, in which all wise and free governments had deemed it sound policy to cherish and not to check.
That what you said about that kind of reminded me of something that my wife likes to say. She says, well, you love being the center of attention. No, I love to be a public speaker. That doesn't necessarily mean I love to be the center of attention. And that's kind of what's going on here with Wilson. He's like, people who have this ambition to, well, not everybody who wants office is that. They have the personality, they have the confidence. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are a problem. But anyway, go ahead.
Goes on to say, the members of the legislature have perhaps the hardest and least profitable task of any who engage in the service of the state. Ought this merit to be made a disqualification? I'm not sure if I agree they got the hardest and least profitable task, at least according to today's standards. All right, let's get through Sherman and call it a day, depending on what he says here.
Sherman in Connecticut.
He observes that the motion did not go far enough. It might be evaded by the creation of a new office, the translation of it to a person from another office, and the appointment of a member of the legislature to the latter. Talked about the shell game, which we know they can play. A new embassy might be established to a new court and an ambassador taken from another in order to create a vacancy for a favorite member. He admitted that inconveniences lay on both sides. He hoped there would be sufficient inducements to the public service without resorting to the prospect of desirable offices, and on the whole was rather against the motion of Mr. Madison.
What's interesting here is they're talking about parties without talking about parties and without parties existing. They recognize that birds of a feather flock together, we organize, we pick our little groups, which becomes political parties. That's what they're talking about. Are we going to have our guy, our ideological pairing, the guy that we like to, into that office? This is an argument over whether or not political parties should be able to play the shell game. That's really what it is. And political parties don't even exist at this point. I don't even know if they were wondering if there was going to be political parties. I'm sure most of them realized there would be someday. But that's basically what they're talking about, is the fear of the parties playing the shell game.
Very good. I think that's a pretty good summary of where we're at. Randall Gary's going to speak next, and that's going to lead into a very long diatribe by Madison. And so let's leave it where we are here today. Not the most exciting episode we had, but some pretty important topics.
Oh, they're all exciting. Come on now. Especially when you got Hamilton up on top of his desk, stomping his leg because he's so exuberant over whatever he's trying to say.
They really spent their entire time talking about, really worried about corruption and saying we don't, we just don't trust the nature of men. And they're nitpicking some fine points, but they're important. They're really trying to get ahead of the crony capitalist game.
Yeah, human nature is a very, very, very big part of their discussion, for sure.
Yeah, and they've seen the spoils system already. There's already political favoritism, even during the the Revolutionary War. They saw it in the Articles of Confederation.
Well, and they saw it in British mercantilism, and this is just mercantilism by a different name and on a different battlefront, but it's still just basically mercantilism. It's playing favorites. It's giving the nudges to your guy and all that other stuff, and that's what humans do.
Yeah, the spoil system is human nature, and what some of these guys are trying to do is protect against it as much as possible. So although they're nitpicking, there are important points to nitpick.
Right.
Well, I think we can start getting back on a regular schedule.
Okay.
Thank you for being here,
Doug. At least for the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, then I'm traveling again. So, Doug, tell everyone where they can find you, please.
DouglasVGibbs.com. I write pretty much every day. Once I get my computer back, probably in a month or two, hopefully I get back to do a video. I did one video and then I started having all kinds of technical issues. But DouglasVGibbs.com, I write daily. Just go to the blog. You want to become a member of the site where you help fund what we do, hit the join link in the link bar, $9 a month. Donate on the main page, because the AM radio, we are on Saturdays on KMET 1490 AM in Beaumont from 1 to 3 Pacific and 8 p.m. Pacific on 2 stations in San Diego. All 3 of those stations we are at risk of losing because we don't have the funding. Our main advertiser on KMET is retiring in July. So if we don't have the funding to continue by July, the AM radio goes bye-bye. That's the bad news. Good news is I will find a way to keep it going. I'll move it to Rumble if I have to. We'll keep it going. But for those of you who appreciate me as an AM radio host, I've been doing it for 15 years. We really need help. We really need to keep it going. We really need funding. We need advertisers, and we need listeners who are willing to help out. Just become a $9 a month member. Join link in the link bar at DouglasVGibbs.com. Love doing these shows. I love being on the radio. Let's keep it going.
And Doug didn't mention he also does as a guest host with our good friend Ron Partain on the Untold History channel at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays. And I got to I listened to the latter half of their show last night. They're going through a little pre-American Revolution history, and I had to jump into the studio and add a few comments because they were talking about the Dutch Republic, which I've been studying in a lot of detail. And on that note, we're going to go into my whole Secret Societies meets Operation Gladio series with Colonel Towner on Friday is going to be talking about the Dutch Republic, the rise and fall, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that we need to take into today, and had a lot of influences on a lot of the institutions in America, including the stock exchange. So come see me on the Colonel's Corner Friday at noon. That will be live, or you can catch the recording on my channels, which is on Rumble. You're probably watching it, so I don't have to tell you. War Space Hamster. Thanks for being here, Doug.
On that Tuesday show, we've gone through the Constitution like 3 times. We thought, you know what? Let's take a break from the Constitution. Let's go through history. And we want that way we can get into more details about the history behind the Declaration of Independence, slavery, the Constitution, the War of 1812, the Revolutionary War, the Mexican-American War, those people that War Hamster likes to call the robber barons. Even get into that maybe a little bit. Hey, you might even want to pop in on those shows when we get there down the road. And then once we're done with history, then we'll go back to the Constitution again. It just felt like it was a good break from the Constitution to take.
Yeah, I think your audience has enjoyed the change of pace too as well.
Sure, absolutely. History is important to the Constitution and vice versa. So there you go.
Doug, thanks for being here, everybody. Thanks for watching. Until the next time, everybody, cheers.